Hello, my name is Walter Reeves, and you're watching my FHIR demo presentation for the Georgia Tech Introduction to Health Informatics course. Briefly about myself, I have worked in information technology for about 25 years, primarily in the property and casualty insurance industry. Initially, I scheduled health informatics to satisfy one of the requirements of the interactive intelligence specialization, but with some experience with the course, I am now quite excited about the potential impact that computing can have on quality of life in the most literal sense. FHIR, or Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, is a standards framework developed by Health Level 7 International, or HL7, for sharing healthcare information electronically. HL7 sums up the importance of the need for FHIR in their vision statement: a world in which everyone can securely access and use the right health data when and where they need it. The FHIR standard is currently transitioning from the draft standard for Trial Use 2 to the standard for Trial Use 3. Now let's discuss the core component of FHIR, resources. Resources are used to modularize FHIR into manageable components. For example, one of the obvious resources you would expect to find is the patient resource. This resource is used to communicate the WHO information about a patient, such as name, gender, and birth date. The resource also has mechanisms built into it to handle duplicate records and records stored in multiple systems or locations. Let's use the Georgia Tech implementation of FHIR to see what the patient resource looks like. As you see here, this server is implementing version 1.6 of the standard, which is a pre-release of STU3. The FHIR resources available are listed on the left side of the screen. Selecting the patient resource from the list will bring us to the search page used to look up patient information. On the search page, we're presented with the parameters available for looking up the selected type of resource, in this case, patient. Here we have the various choices for finding a patient. I will use the name here since I want to find information for our most popular patient, Marla Dixon. I could use the family search parameter, but I think Marla is more likely to be unique than Dixon would be. So here I've selected the name parameter and entered Marla as the value to search with. Now simply click the search button to retrieve Marla's information. Here we see the response from the server based on the request to find the patient resource for Marla. The request and response headers are shown here, and scrolling down we will find the JSON formatted message containing Marla's information. As stated previously, we can see information recorded about who Marla Dixon is. One item to take particular note of is the value of ID from the resource element in the message. We will use this later for additional searches. The next FHIR resource we will discuss is the encounter resource. This resource is used to record interactions between patients and healthcare providers. It includes elements for providers and the location where services are provided, even if there are multiples of either. Again, selecting the resource from the list on the left of the screen brings us to the search page for that resource. Selecting patient from the list presents us with the specific search options related to the patient resource. Here are the parameters available to search for a patient. We will use the patient ID noted earlier when viewing Marla's patient resource record. Now that the parameter and value have been entered, simply press the search button. Here's the request and response header information for this search. Pay particular attention to the list of 3 encounters below the headers with a read button beside each encounter. Scrolling down, we can see the raw message data, but when there is a lot of information, it is probably better to use the read buttons to narrow the view to a single encounter. Doing so, we can now view one of Marla's visits more clearly. The next FHIR resource we will discuss is the medication order resource. Most of us would consider this to be a prescription, but there are other uses for the resource that require it to be a bit more general. This resource contains information about medications and the instructions for administering the medication. It also can contain information regarding medication substitutions. Selecting the medication order resource brings us to the search page. Once again, we will use Marla's patient ID to search with. This should look familiar. And we find that Marla has 3 medication orders. Scrolling down to the raw message again shows why the read buttons are useful. Clicking the first read button allows us to view only one of Marla's medications. So where does FHIR stand now? FHIR as a standard has gained significant ground in its adoption. John Halamka's statement that FHIR is the HTML of healthcare means that further adoption is inevitable. Smart Health IT has created an application platform that supports apps based on FHIR. The Cerner Open Developer Experience gives developers a place to immediately start coding with Smart on FHIR tools. The VA has formed a working group to transition to the FHIR standard, and CareFluent's Open API was the first FHIR-compliant solution to be certified for Stage 3 meaningful use by the Office of the National Coordinator. Lastly, thanks to these folks for some of the information used in this presentation. I hope you found it interesting and informative.